At 6:45 in the morning on January the 6th, 2021, Officer Harry Dunn arrived for duty on Capitol Hill. But little did he know that over the next 17 hours, his life would change forever. Around 12:50, as Donald Trump was midway through his speech at the Ellipse, there were urgent police radio calls for backup on the west side of the Capitol.
Priority, we just had protesters. C-Circle, breach the line. We need backup.
When Dunn reached them, he was met with a striking scene, and as he details in his new book, Standing My Ground, everything was chaos and madness. Officers fighting with rioters, then getting relief. Officers heading back to the fight, then returning because they needed their eyes and skin flushed with water to wash off the spray. At some point, the radio blasted, "Attention all units, the Capitol had been breached." And it was then that Dunn knew what he was dealing with was unprecedented. As the rioters broke their way inside, the calls for help grew more and more panicked.
We have 4 breaches! Breach, multiple units, send all you have.
Inside the Capitol, Dunn faced off against rioters carrying Trump signs, Confederate symbols, and even neo-Nazi flags. He not only fought off physical attacks from these rioters, but racist attacks too. He writes, "Your personal politics have nothing to do with your job, but in this circumstance, I responded to the rioters. Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That went over with a thud. Instead of getting them to acknowledge another person's humanity, it did just the opposite. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This N-word voted for Joe Biden." Then the whole crowd, I'm guessing there were about 20 of them, joined in, screaming, "Boo, effing N-word." No one had ever called me the N-word while I was wearing the uniform of a Capitol police officer. These are just some of the very fine people who Donald Trump drew to the Capitol on January the 6th. Violent racists who wanted to overthrow our democracy. It was a realization that shocked Dunn, who in his decade plus of protecting the Capitol had never seen anything like it. Quote, "Then everything hit me all at once. I was crying, tears streaming down my face. I hadn't processed the N-word before, but now everything was starting to sink in. The blood, the violence, the pain, the smells, the sounds, the threats, the attacks, the racism, the desecration of the nation's capital." And then I started yelling the same thing over and over. Is this America? Is this America? A truly heartbreaking question. The rage, anger, and sadness that Dunn experienced stayed with him long after January the 6th. He was later diagnosed with PTSD. In the face of his own trauma, Dunn still had the courage to speak out. He testified before the January 6th committee, recounting everything he experienced that day, hinting at one man responsible, Donald Trump.
If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that.
While Trump has been indicted for his attempts to overturn the election and members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers have been sentenced, none of it takes away the pain that he felt, that Dunn felt on January the 6th and after. "I would give everything back, the Congressional Gold Medal, the meeting and medal from President Biden, every media interview, every television appearance, my trial testimony and my appearance before a congressional committee, if it would mean that January the 6th never happened. I don't give a damn about any of those things." As the 3-year anniversary approaches and the 2024 election draws near, there's a lot of work we need to do as a country to heal our democracy. There is hope. And as Officer Dunn points out, amid the darkness of January the 6th, there's a lot we can learn from the officers there that day. Quote, "Part of my inspiration is the men and women I fought with on January the 6th. They never backed down. They never stopped. They never quit. I promise I will do the same. I will always be standing my ground." A very heroic message. Joining me now is the man himself, Officer Harry Dunn. His new book is Standing My Ground, Capitol Police Officers Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble After January the 6th. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on the book, but it's not a book you wish you'd written. And I got to ask, what made you want to write? It's a very powerful book. What made you want to write it and write it while you're still a serving police officer alongside other officers who may not like everything in here, protecting members of Congress who may not like everything in here?
The simple answer is I had a story to tell. Writing the book was cathartic, but it was also therapeutic for me. I was dealing with the trauma and PTSD. It's important to work through it, and writing that book helped me work through it. Also, there's ongoing threat to democracy.
Yeah.
And the world's on fire right now. And I kind of, like, hopefully that could be a little bit of a fire extinguisher, give people an honest account of what happened that day and why we should care about our country and care about what happened on January 6th, especially because there's still a threat that it could happen again.
What's interesting, of course, is that in 2021, you and your fellow officers were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for your service on January the 6th, and yet there were 21 Republican members who voted against giving you guys that medal, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, and others. I wonder what it's like to go into work and carry on doing what you described so eloquently, passionately in the book you had to do on January 6th, protect these people with your life. Yeah. Some of whom, as I say, don't like what you wrote in the book, don't agree with this book, and don't even think you and your fellow officers should have been recognized in that way.
Well, so police officers are human beings. Everybody in this world is human being, has feelings. What makes a good police officer or a good public servant is being able to set your personal feelings aside and do the job that you signed up for, what is your responsibility to the country, that oath of office that we take to this country, to democracy. And that's how I do it. I focus on that. And, you know, I try not to let my personal feelings get involved. And I've been successful at it. I'm starting year 16 of the Capitol coming up, and there's been many people that have worked in that building that I did not agree with on both sides of the aisle.
And just to be quickly, none of your fellow officers, none of the members of Congress have said anything to you about this book in a negative way? There's been no negative backlash to you?
Not directly. Not directly. I guess that's...
You hear things.
Yeah, you hear things, but not directly.
Let's talk about feelings. You open your book saying we need to talk about our trauma. You're then very open about your own PTSD in the wake of January the 6th, about your healing journey. A lot of people say that's a pretty bold move on your part, given police officers are known for being macho, kind of masculinity. How hard was it to kind of break that wall?
Personally, I don't have a problem with it. I believe in being my authentic self at all times. And maybe that's something that was instilled in me. And I talk about it in the book. It's instilled in me at a young age. My parents, preached therapy and mental health. I had that. I was fortunate to have two great parents that, raised me to be like that. So that wasn't hard for me. I've always saying, this is who I am, accept it or don't. And obviously you're here. Obviously, Kerry, you're still here. You're still listening. You want to hear about what I have to say. So that makes it a little bit easier. Telling my story, I'm going to tell it regardless of who's listening because it works for me. Now, along that way, if one or two people, it helps them out, then it's even worth it even more. But about the trauma part, like I acknowledge all of Americans in that trauma, not just me on January 6th or my coworkers, but that was an attack on this country. Yeah. And people that were watching will always remember where they were when they were watching that day.
So you said a moment ago you wrote this book because you had a story to tell. And it is a very unique story because obviously other Capitol Police officers have written books, done media interviews, but everyone has their own story. What really stood out to me in this book, and I'm sure to a lot of people, is that moment I mentioned in the introduction where you're confronting these rioters and they start shouting the N-word at you, and you say, in uniform, obviously outside of uniform, in uniform you'd never experienced that kind of brazen racism. And I was shocked when I read that and when I heard it at the time. And I wonder, that seems to be a part of the January 6th story that a lot of people are not aware of. I think people think of these people were angry about the election, the big lie, Trump wound them up, or you don't hear many people say, I know we talk about the Confederate flag as if, out of thousands of people, but there's a group of people chanting the N-word in the midst of this day.
Yeah. So I want to make it clear, I don't believe that January 6th was about race or racism. I don't think it was a racist event. I don't believe it at all. But there were racist people there, and to suggest anything opposite that is completely outrageous to me. But there were racist people there.
But you were stunned at that moment.
Yeah, at that moment, like I said, when it happened, like I said, I didn't process it because I was just trying to make it through the day, trying to survive. But when I had a moment to actually sit down and think about it, it hit me. And that's when I asked the question, is this America? And the answer to that question is, yeah, this is America. And it's been going on. That type of stuff has been going on for a long time. Not January 6th, but the attitudes that these people had that felt they felt entitled to do what they did on January 6th. That attitude has always existed. And it just reared its ugly head again on January 6th.
Just sticking with the race issue, though, I'm intrigued by this, the race angle, because I believe, and tell me if you think you agree or disagree with me, we've had a lot of discussion about why the police weren't ready, why law enforcement were caught off guard, why there weren't enough people, etc., endless. We've had a congressional inquiry, multiple different inquiries, media inquiries into, despite all the intelligence, all the open warnings that this was going to happen, how did the Capitol get breached? How did you get outnumbered? And for me, part of it is to do with the fact that these people were Trump supporters. They were white Americans. And law enforcement did not think that white Americans would do this. I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, that if the crowd that had been marching from the ellipse to the Congress looked like you or looked like me, if there was a bunch of black people or a bunch of Muslims, I think law enforcement would have handled it very differently and would have prepared very differently.
The only thing I'll say about that is a group of people who looked like you and looked like me did march to the Capitol when the Black Lives Matter riots took place. They came to the Capitol, they shouted, they yelled, they did not attack us. They stayed behind the bike racks, they didn't breach it. That's the difference. That group that looked like you and me, they did come to the Capitol.
And there were a lot of arrests.
Correct.
That day, if I remember correctly.
No. At the Capitol, no. I can't speak for what happened at the White House in D.C., but at the Capitol, I don't think that is the case. Maybe that's me being optimistic or naive, but that group did come to the Capitol, and we were not met with the anger and the audacity that we were met with on January 6th, that those individuals thought that they had the right to do what they were doing.
And on that note about having the right of doing what they were doing, we have polls over the last couple of years of Americans where you see Republican voters tell pollsters that they think the people on January the 6th were patriots, that they were doing the right thing.
Even the former president.
Indeed. Put him to one side. Just ordinary Americans who you might be sitting on the metro with or, in the grocery store with, are telling pollsters they think that what happened on January 6th, those people were patriots. You obviously were in the midst of all that. You saw very clearly that these were not peaceful patriots. When you see polling like that, how does that make you feel? How do we get to this point where people just don't even believe what happened on January 6th was horrific?
Well, that's another reason I wrote the book. Because to that narrative that it was a peaceful or legitimate political discourse, that narrative will continue to run wild unless there are people who are willing to stand up and say, no, this isn't what happened. That's not what happened. What you say happened is a lie. So we need people, and not just me, anybody with the story that day, whether they agree, tell your story, tell what happened. And I encourage everybody to tell their story. But that's part of why you write the book, to tell your side of the story, and so the history won't get whitewashed.
You mentioned the former president. We've had something like 800 rioters have pled guilty or been convicted. We've seen kind of oath keepers and Proud Boys go down for kind of seditious conspiracy, insurrection. Donald Trump is finally going to be held to some account in a couple of election-related trials next year. How closely are you going to be watching those trials, and how much do you think America is ready to put a former president behind bars?
I'll be there every day. It's important for me to see this all the way through. The January 6th here in D.C. Now, obviously I'm following the classified materials and the Georgia. I'm following it, but January 6th is personal to me, so I would definitely be following it. As far as the former president going to jail, just think about it. Like, his support is growing. It's growing after January. He didn't lose it. He gained support. Well, at least that's what the polls tell us, but we can't really count on those all the time. But I do believe in the American people. I'll have a little bit of celebration, for a minute or two if he's convicted. But the idea of Donald Trump and his followers and supporters, it doesn't go away. It's an ideology. MAGA isn't a person. It's an ideology. So those people, whether Donald Trump is in jail or not, or in the White House or not, they still exist. And we can't just discredit those individuals as delusional or crazy, even though that's what we may view them as. They still exist, and they still have a right to vote and all that. So how do we reach them? I don't know. I don't know, but I know one thing is to continue to put the truth out there, and we need good people to continue to join the fight and speak up and speak out.
So we're out of time, but I got to ask, you mentioned joining the fight. Last month you tweeted about the news of an open house seat in Maryland, suggesting you might be interested in running for Congress. How seriously are you thinking about running for Congress?
I'm definitely thinking about it. Because, like, one of the things I like to say, until there's nothing that can be done, there's always something that can be done. And maybe that's a continuation of public service. I don't know. But I'm definitely thinking about it.
You've got a head start because people who run for office write these really, really boring campaign books. You've actually written a very powerful
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me.
So thank you for taking time out.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. Thank you.